There is a stretch of prairie in southeastern Kansas that looks, even today, like the kind of place where nothing ever happened. Flat land running to the horizon in every direction, grass bending in the wind, the sky so wide it seems to press down on everything beneath it. In 1871, this land was the frontier, the edge of the settled world, and along a dirt road that crossed it, a family built an inn. They called themselves the Benders. There were four of them, a father, a mother, a son, and a daughter. They sold groceries and hot meals to travelers passing through. They were, by the account of anyone who stopped there, perfectly ordinary. The father was a large, quiet man who did not say much. The mother was stout and sharp-tongued and kept the cooking. The son was awkward and strange, given to sudden laughing that made people uncomfortable without knowing quite why. And the daughter was something else entirely. She spoke English well, which her parents did not. She was considered handsome. She had a directness about her that travelers found appealing, even charming. Her name was Kate, and Kate Bender may have been the most dangerous person in that family. She may have been the most dangerous person on the Kansas frontier. What happened inside that inn between 1871 and 1873 would not be discovered for 2 years. And when it would stop the country cold. The land that became Labette County, Kansas, was open to settlement in the late 1860s as part of the broader push west that defined post-Civil War America. The Osage Trail ran through it, later called the Road to Independence, and along this trail moved a steady current of humanity. Homesteaders with everything they owned loaded onto wagons, cattle drovers returning from drives, land speculators, drifters, veterans of the war who had come home to find nothing waiting and decided to keep moving. It was a world of transience and anonymity. A man could leave Illinois in March and reach Kansas in May, and nobody along the way would know his name, or where he had come from, or whether he had family waiting to hear from him. The Benders arrived in this landscape in 1871 and filed a claim on a parcel of land near the small settlement of Cherryvale. They built a one-room structure of rough lumber. It served as grocery, as inn, as dining room. A single canvas curtain divided the space in two. On one side of the curtain, travelers sat at a table and were fed. On the other side of the curtain was the family's sleeping area. This arrangement was not unusual on the frontier. Space was scarce. Privacy was a luxury. Nobody who stopped at the Bender Inn and sat down at that table and ate their meal thought anything particular about the canvas curtain hanging a few feet behind their chair. That curtain was the last thing a number of men ever sat in front of. The method the Benders used was simple, and it was effective, and it required almost no risk to the family at all. A traveler would be invited to sit at the table with his back to the curtain. Kate would engage him in conversation. She was good at this. She was warm and she was direct, and she had a quality that made men want to stay a little longer, talk a little more, accept another cup of whatever was being offered. While the traveler sat with his attention forward, someone behind the curtain would swing a hammer through the canvas with enough force to fracture the skull. The victim would be dragged behind the curtain. His throat would be cut. His body would be taken through a trapdoor in the floor, into a pit beneath the inn, and his belongings, his money, his horse, whatever he had been carrying, would be absorbed into the Bender household as if he had never existed. It was not a complicated system. Its genius was in its simplicity and in the landscape around it. Out on that flat prairie, a man could disappear, and the disappearance would take months to be noticed. The nearest town was miles away. There were no witnesses. There was nothing but grass and wind, and the Osage Trail moving east and west toward the horizon. Between 1871 and 1873, at least 11 people are confirmed to have been killed at the Bender Inn. The true number is likely higher. Some researchers have placed it as high as 20 or more. But 11 is the number that can be attached to names and to accounts and to the physical evidence that was eventually recovered. Among the dead were men traveling alone, men traveling with companions who escaped, and one man whose murder would prove to be the catalyst that finally brought the Benders down. His name was Dr. William York. He was a physician, and a man of some standing in the community. He had a brother named Colonel Alexander York, a man with connections and resources, and the kind of persistence that makes him something more than a grieving family member. William York disappeared in March of 1873 while traveling through Labette County. He had been expected, he did not arrive, and Colonel York began to look for him. He was not the first person looking for a missing traveler in Labette County. By the spring of 1873, the disappearances had accumulated to the point where they were becoming a subject of open discussion in the region. Men had gone missing along the Osage Trail with a frequency that exceeded what could be explained by accident or ordinary misfortune. A committee of local settlers had been formed to investigate. They were working through the homesteads and inns along the trail one by one. The Benders were on the list. Colonel York visited the Bender Inn personally in his search for his brother. He sat at that table. He spoke to Kate. She told him she had spiritual gifts and could help him locate his missing brother if he wished. He listened. He left. He was not killed that day, and nobody knows with certainty why. Perhaps he was not alone. Perhaps something in the encounter unsettled him in a way he could not name. Perhaps the Benders, sensing the net beginning to close, had already begun to think about leaving. In early May of 1873, neighbors noticed that the Bender Inn had gone quiet. No smoke from the chimney, no movement. The animals were loose and unfed. Someone went to investigate. The door was unlocked. The interior was empty. The canvas curtain hung still in the single room. The table was set as if for a meal that nobody had come to eat. The Benders were gone. The search party that arrived shortly after made the first discovery in the orchard behind the inn. The ground had been disturbed. They dug. They found Dr. William York. His skull had been fractured from behind. His throat had been cut. They dug elsewhere in the orchard. They found more. One by one, the bodies came up out of the Kansas earth, some badly decomposed, some preserved by the cold of the soil, some missing entirely, only fragments remaining. A child was found, a girl of approximately 8 years of age. She had not been struck. The evidence suggested she had been thrown into the pit alive and buried with her father, who lay beside her. This detail, when it circulated through the newspapers, produced a reaction that went beyond outrage. It was the detail that fixed the Benders permanently in the public imagination as something that exceeded ordinary crime. The investigation of the Bender property revealed the full mechanics of what had happened there. The trapdoor, the pit beneath the floor, dark and reeking, stained in a way that left no ambiguity about what it had been used for. The hammer, the arrangement of the table and the curtain. It was reconstructed precisely and reported in the press in precise and unflinching detail. The country read it and could not look away. The Benders had perhaps a week's head start. The manhunt that followed was one of the most extensive in the history of the Kansas frontier. Posses rode in multiple directions. Telegrams went out across the country. Every railroad station, every border crossing, every town of any size was alerted. Colonel York threw his personal resources into the search. The state of Kansas offered a reward. The federal government was aware of the case. And despite all of it, the Benders were never officially confirmed caught. This is the part of the story that history has never fully resolved, and it is the part that has kept the Benders in the conversation for 150 years. In the months following the discovery, there were reported sightings across the country: Texas, Michigan, Colorado, Canada. 2 women were arrested in Michigan in 1889 and briefly identified as Kate and Ma Bender, drawing enormous press attention before the charges were dropped. Various individuals over the years claimed to have information about the fate of one or more of the family members. None of it was conclusive. There is a persistent account, passed down through the history of Labette County, that a posse did catch the Benders, and that what happened to them was handled privately, without the inconvenience of a trial, in the manner that frontier justice sometimes operated. This account has been repeated often enough, and with enough apparent detail, that some historians treat it as credible. Others point to the absence of any body, any documented confession, any physical evidence as reason to remain skeptical. The official record is silent. The Benders disappeared into the American West and were never brought before a court of law. Kate Bender was approximately 24 years old when the family fled. She had, during her time in Labette County, given public lectures on spiritualism, a fashionable subject in the 1870s, drawing audiences in nearby towns. She had been described by those who met her as magnetic. The word comes up more than once in accounts from people who encountered her. Magnetic. It is not an entirely comfortable word when applied to a woman who may have spent 2 years luring travelers to their deaths. The question of who drove the killings at the Bender Inn has never been settled. Some accounts emphasize the mother, described by neighbors as domineering and frightening, a woman who could stop a conversation dead with a look. Some emphasize Kate, who had the language skills and the social capability that made the operation work. Some have suggested that the family was essentially run by the 2 women, and that the men, John Sr. and John Jr., were instruments rather than architects. The truth, as with most things about the Benders, is unavailable. What is available is the record of what they left behind. 11 confirmed dead in 2 years. A method so efficient it left almost no trace. A disappearance so complete that no court ever heard their names read as defendants. A child buried alive in a pit in the Kansas earth. The newspapers of 1873 gave the Benders the name by which they are still known, the Bloody Benders. It was a name that sold papers, and it was a name that stuck, but stripped of its tabloid compression. What it pointed toward was something that unsettled Americans at a particular moment in their history. The frontier was supposed to be a place of reinvention, a place where a man or a family could come with nothing and build something. The promise of the West was space and possibility and a clean beginning. The Benders had taken that promise and had used it as cover. They had understood that the anonymity of the frontier worked in both directions, that a traveler could vanish and that a family could vanish, that the same open landscape that offered freedom to the homesteader offered freedom to the predator. They had built their inn at the exact intersection of trust and isolation, and they had operated there for 2 years without suspicion, in plain sight on a public road serving hot meals. There is a historical marker today on the land in Labette County where the Bender Inn stood. The original structure is long gone. The orchard where the bodies were found is gone. There is grass and there is sky, and there is the wind that has always blown across that part of Kansas. If you stand there and look in any direction, you see exactly what those travelers saw in 1871 and 1872 and 1873 as they came along the trail toward the inn. Flat land to the horizon, a road, and in the middle distance, a small structure with a light in the window that meant food and rest and human company after a long day of riding alone through empty country. It looked like safety. That was the point. It always looked like safety. If this story reached something in you, if you found yourself unable to look away from the Benders, the same way the country could not look away in 1873, then you already know what this channel is about. We find the cases that history filed away and forgot, the ones that happened in real places, to real people, whose names are still in the record if you know where to look. Subscribe and stay close. The next case we are bringing you is one that has been sitting in a courthouse archive for over a century, and the details, when we lay them all out, are going to trouble you in exactly the way the best true crime always does. We will see you there.